Hello friends! Welcome to Coding Garden with CJ! So much fun. Today we're going to be doing a Vue.js Appstravaganza. So the idea is I'm going to build several Vue.js applications from fairly simple to slightly more difficult. And yeah, it's going to be a fun time. So let's get right into it. Not going to waste any time. If you're watching live, throw a message in the chat and I'd be happy to answer questions, talk about things, whatever you like. I have a checklist of all the things we're going to build. So first I will review like what is Vue.js if you've never heard of it or you're totally new to it. Just a second. And then the apps I'm going to be building. So the first thing is a player score counter. The idea is you have two players and you can up or down each player's score. Then I'll build a to-do app. So we'll have a simple form where you can type a to-do, add it to a list. You can mark to-dos as done or delete to-dos. Then I'm going to create a simple Reddit client. So, we'll make a request out to the Reddit API and get lots of posts from some subreddit. We'll choose that when we get there. We'll add them to the page, try to make it look like Reddit as much as we can. And then you'll be able to favorite posts, and those will actually get saved, and then we'll have a separate page where you can view your favorites. And then we'll also save those favorites to local storage, so if you come back to the website, you can still see your favorites. And I don't know if we'll have time, but if we do, I will get to also a movie search app. So you'll be able to, we'll have a form, you can search for a movie title, list out all of the movies, and then click a movie, which will go to a separate page and show all of the movie details, which will be a separate API request. Okay, so first, what is Vue.js? So their website is vuejs.org, and it labels itself as the progressive JavaScript framework. It is a front-end framework, so if you're familiar with React or Angular or Ember, it's a similar type of framework, and it's for building front-end applications. I personally love Vue.js. It's my favorite front-end framework. In a lot of these videos, I've only been coding in vanilla JavaScript, but really it's good to be good with the basics before you move on to something like this. But it is extremely approachable for beginners. So I'm just going to kind of show you on their website. Their documentation is fantastic, so if you're wanting to learn Vue.js, I would go here first. And one of the key aspects of most front-end frameworks and also Vue.js is this idea of declarative rendering. So instead of writing DOM manipulation code where you are explicitly writing every single step that needs to happen in order to make your app work, you can declare what you want to happen and then simply update some data and it will just happen. And the idea with Vue.js is and most front-end frameworks is we're separating all of the data from the presentation. So you'll notice in this simple example, we have a div, and this syntax here is known as handlebars or like mustache templates. And the idea is you write your view like this, but then when you create some data and actually render the view, whatever the message is under the hood is going to get rendered into the view. Awesome. Thanks, Chopper. So yeah, why is it my favorite? Probably because of the syntax. So if you've tried learning React before, they have a special syntax known as JSX. You have to get used to that. And if you're using JSX, typically you need a build process, so it can get very complicated. With Vue.js, if you know HTML, you know CSS, and you know JavaScript, it's pretty easy to kind of just get started with what you know. And I actually come from an Angular background, so I built Angular apps in production for probably 2 or 3 years. And the creator of Vue.js was inspired by Angular. So if you have used Angular 1, a lot of these directives that I'm going to be showing are very similar in a Vue.js app. But let's just look at this first example on their documentation. So this is our simple view, shows the message. And then this is our Vue.js application. So first you tell it which DOM element will this Vue app be on. And this says it'll be on ID app, so that's that. And then we have some data that's under the hood. And it says the message will be hello Vue. And so when we actually render this view out, this is what we get. And this is really all the code that it takes. But one other thing about Vue.js is that the data is reactive. And it's similar in any other front-end framework, but the idea is if the underlying data changes, Vue will automatically update the view for you. You don't have to do anything else. And one of the cool things about their documentation is all of these examples are available in the terminal. So you'll notice they stored this in a variable called app. So I can do app.message, and we can actually see what the value is. Right now it's hello Vue. But if I update that value and I say, hello coding garden, watch the page, boom, the page instantly updates. So this allows us to build applications fairly quickly because we don't have to do all of this DOM manipulation to manually update the view. We simply just update the data and Vue takes care of that for us. The documentation has tons of other examples. There's lots of built-in directives. I'm just going to get into coding an app and we'll see those things in action. Sweet. Okay, so to the checklist. So first thing we're going to do is generate a simple app. So the Vue.js comes with a CLI tool that allows you to generate apps. You can get it by doing npm install-g vue-cli. That will install it globally, and then you'll have a command available called Vue. And you can do Vue init, and then you tell it which template you want to use. There are several different templates. I'm going to use Webpack Simple, and then you give it the name of your app. And let's call this let's call it Score Counter. So this will create a folder called Score Counter and download the template and then put it in that folder. So we can give our project a name, a description, keep track of scores for 2 players. Author, license, use Sass. I'm going to go ahead and say no. So Sass is a preprocessing, a language that needs to be preprocessed. Cool. To get turned into CSS. I'm not going to use that. I'll just use basic CSS. And it created it. So you'll notice it created that Score Counter folder. Let's go in there and see what we got. So by default, it has a few configuration files in here. If you're not familiar with ES 2015 or like the latest version of JavaScript, it does use a lot of those features like import statements and method definitions on objects. I'll try to explain those things as they come along. But for the most part, you should be somewhat familiar with that. And it comes with a Babel config, which has those things configured. If we look at the index.html, you'll notice it's super simple. It says div id app. And so this is where our Vue.js app is going to live. And then it just has one script tag. So because this is building using Webpack, whenever we run it or deploy it, it creates a single JavaScript file with all of our code in it. But when we're writing it, we actually use multiple files. So let's look in the source directory. So this is where all of your Vue.js code is going to go. And we can look at main.js. This is known as the entry point. So the idea with Webpack is you have a single file that is your entry point, and then it figures out where the rest of your files are based on that one entry point. So this says import Vue, so this is bringing in the Vue library, and then import app. So app is a component that it has predefined for me, and then it says on the element with ID app, render the app. And then let's take a look at app.vue. And so a Vue.js component file is split up into 3 parts. Up at the top is the template. So this is where all of your HTML will go. In the center is the script. So this is where your actual component code will go. And then at the bottom are any styles for that component. Now I realize I haven't defined component, but for the purposes of these first few examples, everything is going to be in a single component. So our app will just exist inside of this one file. Now if we want to get this going, I believe if we look at the package.json, there is a dev script, and this will start up a Webpack dev server. So if I do npm run dev, what happened? Cross-env command not found? Oh, I guess I didn't do an npm install. You need to make sure to npm install inside of that folder. Is this invisible because of my green screen? Let me see. It is weird. See-through LaCroix. This is going to be fun. It's going to be really fun. Cool. So that installed all of my dependencies. And essentially, if we look inside the package.json, this has dependencies on, if we look here, Vue itself, but then also all the things it needs to build it. And as I mentioned, more concepts in here. So it's using Webpack, we're using ES 2015 or later. But for now, you don't really have to worry about that. After you've run the command, it should just work. So now we can do npm run dev. That will start up a dev server on 8080. And this is the Vue.js app. So it's running, and we can see it in the browser. And if we look at the actual code, we can see why it looks like that. So this is the template. First, it has that logo, so that's where you're seeing that image. Then it says handlebars message. And if we look at data, message is welcome to your Vue.js app. So that's what we see in the browser. And then the rest of it is just plain old HTML. It's a bunch of links out to resources for learning Vue. So let's get started by just deleting everything in here. So we're going to start off with a totally blank and empty app, and we're going to make data totally empty too. And now when I do that, we get nothing on the page. So let's go to our checklist. We generated a simple app. Awesome. So for this app, and you've probably seen me do it in previous apps, I am going to use Bootstrap. So you might have heard of Bootstrap. It is a CSS framework that kind of gives you nice styles by default. And I'm going to use this, which is, it is Bootstrap, but it's custom themes that were created. You can use all the same Bootstrap classes that you know, but it has some styling by default. Let's choose Slate. Slate is probably my favorite. I do like dark themes. And on here you can click bootstrap.min.css, and that will give you a CSS file, and then we need to add it to the app. For this, I'm just going to add it to the HTML, so nothing special here. Just like if it were some regular app that I'm building, I can just add a link tag in, and then that automatically gives me, if it refreshes, the styles from that, and I can access all of the Bootstrap classes now. Okay, so we added Bootstrap, good to go. An up button for player one. So let's go ahead and just add some stuff. So let's do like an H1. Let's call this player score counter. Let's see what we got. Oh, interesting. Why is that so dark? Oh, all of these styles that the app came with. I don't want any of these because I am using Bootstrap. So let's just get rid of these two. Make those nothing. Now what do we get? Cool. Player score counter. Bootstrap has some built-in classes for centering stuff. Let's use that. So if we look at layout, no, content, typography, maybe not. Maybe it is in layout. Oh, from England. Welcome, Daniel. Fantastic. That's awesome. Utilities for layout. It's in here somewhere. Let me search for center. Text alignment. That's what I want. Okay, we're just getting started. This is my break timer, though, so look away from the screen, take a quick stretch, get ready to learn some Vue. Cool. So Bootstrap has these built-in classes where you can just say text center, and it will center the text. So right now it's off to the left, but if I add this class on the H1, it should center it. Very cool. Okay, so below that, I want to add an up button for player one. So let's do this. Let's just create a div where we're going to put player one's counter. And actually, I know in Bootstrap 3 they had a thing called a well or a panel. Panel got moved to card. So let's look at cards. I really just want a basic card. So this gives me an example of a card that has like an image and text. I kind of just want this. Yeah, so like each player's counters will be in their own card. So we'll throw that there. What time is it in England? It's 8:30 p.m. Are you up pretty early? Cool, let's see what we get when we do this. Very cool. One thing I will do though is give this div a class of container. What that will do is give it some padding on the sides, yeah, so it pushes in a little bit. Cool, and this is where I'm going to put the player one stuff. So let's just say inside the body we'll have a button, and Bootstrap also has these built-in buttons that look pretty cool. So this will say, let's do this down, get a down button, and then let's add another button that is up and down. Very cool. If we look at their buttons, they have different colors. Let's do green, so success, as the up button. So button dash success. And then button dash danger as the down button. Cool. And let's just throw, I wonder if text center will work on here to center those buttons. It does, very cool. And then right in the middle, I want to show player 1 score. So let's at the top throw like an H3. 3 a.m. Oh, wow, you're up pretty late. Well, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I guess you could say it's early or late. It's that in-between time. Let's just say player 1 right here. Cool. And then I want to show the score. Let's do like an H4. Let's say their score is 0. Cool. It's very interesting that it's putting that. Oh, because it's an H4. Let's just do a paragraph tag. Really? I'm curious because I want the score to be in between the two buttons. It's very interesting. Oh, I need something that's not block level. What about a small? That could do it. Or I guess let's just do a span. Cool. And we can like up that text size. Let's give this a class of player-score. And then down here in the style section, we can create this. So if I do player score, let's do font size. Let's do like 2M. We'll bump it up real big. Boom. Let's do it even bigger. 4M. Boom. Cool. And so here's what I want to happen. And actually, let me get back to my checklist. So I added an up button and a down button. We need to hook them up though. So the idea when you're working with a Vue.js application is to think about what is the data behind your app. And in our case, the data that's going to be changing is the score itself. So in our data, let's create a property that we can use for the player 1 score. So let's here say player_1_score, and we'll initialize that to 0. And now if I want to use that in my view, I'll just use the handlebars and throw that there. So now when it renders, it should be 0 by default. And if I were to set this to like 10, when it renders, it takes the actual value. So what we want to happen is when we click the up button, we should increase the score. And when we click the down button, we should decrease the score. So let's do that. So on the up button, you can say @click, and you specify a method that will be called, and then we can define that method. So let's call this increase score. And actually, let's do this. So what I'm thinking is I want to reuse this increase score button. Oh, increase score function. I won't do that just yet. Well, never mind. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so when we call increase score, like when we click on this button, it should increment the score. So to do that, we need some methods. So in my component here, I can say methods. And then let's define this thing, increase score. And essentially, all I want to do is say player 1 score equals player 1 score plus 1. So inside of methods, in order to modify data, you use this. So if I say this dot player 1 score, and I realize my autocomplete isn't kicking in. Oh well, you'll see me type a bunch. And I can say plus equals 1. And because we're doing this, we're actually modifying the data, so the view should update. Should be as easy as that. Up. Yeah, look at that. All day long. Cool. So let's do the same thing for down. So right here, I'll say @click equals decrease score. And then we need a method called decrease score. Decrease. And this will be minus equals 1. So we can go up and then down and negative, but I don't think we want negative, so let's do a check in our function. So here we'll say if this dot player score, player 1 score, is greater than 0. So if it's greater than 0, then we'll decrement it. Otherwise, we'll just leave it the way it is. So now I shouldn't be able to get below 0. So I can go up, I can go down, and it stops there. So I can't get any lower. Very cool. But now we want a player 2. So I am essentially just going to copy and paste this. So we'll have our player 1 there, and then this will be player 2. But watch this. Because it's bound, when I click up, it's modifying both of them, right? Because both of them are looking at player 1 score. Now, I could just do like player 2 score, And then inside of here, I would probably need 4 methods, because I'd need a method called like increase player 1 score, decrease player 1 score, increase player 2 score, decrease player 2 score. But I want to reuse these functions, so let's do this. On here, I'm going to say player 1 is an object that has a score, and we'll initialize that to 0. And then I'll say player 2 is an object that has a score, and we'll initialize that to 0. So now up here, we'll say player1.score, and here we'll do player2.score. So that works. But now these buttons are looking at the wrong property, right? Now this property doesn't exist. So what I want to do is pass the player into the function and then modify its score. So for this one, I'll pass in player 1, and for this one, I'll pass in player 2. And then now the functions will get access to a player, and then we just want to say player.score plus equals 1. And then same thing here, we'll pass in the player, and then we'll do player.score, and then player.score minus equals 1. So now this function accepts the player, so either it's going to be modifying player 1 or player 2. Now it's broken. Let's see why. Player 1, player 2. It shouldn't be this. It should just be player, because I'm not accessing it on the data. Right? Because we're essentially modifying the value that got passed in, so I don't have to decide which one to touch on the data. So when the down button is clicked here, we pass in player 1. So decrease gets player 1. It's called player here, but essentially we're passing in this one. Then we say if score is greater than 0, decrement it. And then same thing with increase score. We're either passing in player 2 or player 1. This should work. Okay, so now this increases, and this increases and decreases regardless of the one above it. We have ourselves a score counter. Pretty freaking great. Okay, what was I doing in my checklist? So I have my up button, my down button for player 2. Watch the scores for changes and save to local storage. I'm going to skip this because I want to get down to building some other apps. We are going to use local storage in some of these other ones. Any questions or things you want to see me do to this app before we move on to another one? Pretty simple stuff. I know the chat's a little bit delayed, but I think I'll move on to the next one. Cool. And actually, I'll push this code up. So if you noticed in the description, there is a link to the repo. So let's add oh no, I'm going to go in here. And then I'll add everything. Sparkles, add score counter. Yeah, I won't skip. I'll definitely show like what local storage is and how to access it. Essentially, it lets us save data in the browser, so if the page refreshes, we don't lose all of our data, because that's one thing to note. So like right now, the score is 8 and 5, but if I refresh the page, it starts back at 0 because the app reloads. But we essentially could make it that it saves the score, so the next time we come to the page, we keep that score. But I'll do that in the to-do app, so we can. It's kind of more practical because you do want to save your to-dos. So I'll commit that and then push it up. Yeah, so rule of thumb on methods versus computed. So this is a bit more of an advanced Vue.js topic, but computed properties are smart in that they know which values on data they're modifying. So a computed property will essentially only get created once. Well, not once. It'll get created when the app initially loads based on the current values of data. And then if that data is ever updated, the computed property will get recalculated. A method is invoked every time the Vue, not every time the Vue renders, but if I had a method invocation inside of like handlebars, do thing here, every time the Vue renders, this would get reinvoked. Whereas a computed property would keep its value, so it's more performant to use those. Yeah. So I would say if you're modifying data, but you know that thing will only change every now and then, use a computed property. But if something needs to be changed constantly, then you'd probably use a method. My rule of thumb. Awesome. Let's move on to the to-do app. So I will get out of, well, no, I'm in my Appstravaganza folder, so I'm going to generate another Vue.js app. So let's minimize score counter, and let's do Vue init webpack dash simple to do. Go. To-do list. Me, no sass, done. So now I can go into the to-do app and do an npm install. And let's take a look. So we got the exact same thing we got last time, but it is a brand new app. So app.vue has all the same stuff it had in there before. I'm going to go ahead and add boot swatch. Let's choose a different one this time. Let's do... Actually, they used to have one called paper. Is that still a thing? Crisp like a new sheet of paper. Minty is a request. Yeah, let's use it. I like that. That's a cool bluish greenish color. So let's grab this CSS file, and in index.html, I already chose Minty. We're going with it. The chat is a little delayed, so again, we are in this to-do app folder. Inside of index.html, I'm going to add a link to the CSS file, and then we'll go into app.vue and kind of pull everything out again. So I'll just have an h1 that says to-do app, and then we'll get rid of all these default styles that it comes with. Get rid of our data, and we have a basic Vue app that does nothing. So I'm going to kill the server that was running for our score counter because they try to run on the same port, and then I'll do npm run dev inside the to-do folder. And wait for it. There it is, to-do app. Let's add kind of the same classes we did before. So app should have a class of container. H1 should have a class of text-center, I think it is. Let's see. Yep, to-do app. Very cool. And to our checklist. So we created it. We added boot swatch. Now let's create a form to add the to-do. I'm going to go to the Bootstrap docs to look at forms. That's my break timer. It has been 15 minutes. Take a stretch. Look away from the screen. Take a sip of your slightly see-through LaCroix. Okay. So in the Bootstrap docs, let's go to forms. And really, I just want a basic form with like one text box and a button. Let's copy everything they have here, but I'll remove some stuff. So let's throw the form right there. See what we get. That looks pretty sweet. I actually like this minty thingy. But let's get rid of everything except for one input box. The for is going to be new to do. The text here will be add. Well, we'll say to do. Let's call it new to do. And the type is just going to be text. We'll get rid of this. So ARIA is for accessibility. So if you have like blind users using a screen reader, that would help out. Actually, let's do it. Let's be accessible. So let's call this new to do help. And then you'll notice down here, we can give it an ID of new to do help. And so that way, if a blind user is using our app, the screen reader will actually read the text inside of here. So we'll say enter a new to do. And then the placeholder will be walk the dog, ... And instead of submit, we'll say add to do. What do we get? Very cool. So what I want to happen is I want to type a to-do in here, like make dinner. And then when I click add, I want to add it to a list down below. So first thing we need is a function that will run when the form is submitted. So on the form, there's this thing called the submit event. And so we'll say when it's submitted, let's call add to do. And then we'll create this add to do on our methods. So down here, let's say methods. We'll do add to do. And then for now, we'll just log form submitted. Let's see what happens. So we'll open the DevTools. And things, when I click this, you'll notice it logged for like a split second and then the page refreshed. So just like when you're working with vanilla JavaScript in DOM manipulation, a form will attempt to send the data somewhere. And to prevent that, we need to do prevent default. So this is really easy because it's built into Vue. On the submit, we can just say .prevent, and that automatically prevents the default action. So now I'll refresh the page. If I click submit, the page doesn't refresh and our thing gets logged. Cool. And so now when we submit this, I actually want to log what the user typed into the form. So if we again think about separating our data from the app itself, in this case, our data needs like a new to do, which is an empty string. So essentially, when the app loads, the thing they're typing in the form is nothing. It's just empty. And now we need to tell Vue.js that whenever they type in this input box, it should automatically update new to do under the hood. For that, you use this directive called a vModel. And essentially what this does is it binds this property to the input. So if someone types into the input, under the hood, it's actually updating this value. And if this value gets changed in a method, the input box will automatically get updated with whatever the new value is. So we say vModel equals new to do. Cool. And so one thing I haven't shown yet are the Vue.js dev tools. So you can install this from the Chrome Web Store, but these are really good for helping to debug your app. So you can click on your app and you can see under the hood what your data looks like. So watch as I type in here, under the hood, it's actually updating that new to do property. So that's super awesome because now that that's being updated inside of the function that gets called when we submit, I have access to that value. Woo! Just to drive home what's happening here, like if I add like let's say like an H3 down here, and inside of that I do new to do. Now, no matter everything that I type into this input box is going to show up down here in this H3. Ready for it? Woo! So much fun. Okay, that was just a demonstration. But now, when the form is submitted, let's log the value that they typed in the form. So to do that, I just need to log this.newToDo. And so remember, inside of the methods, anything you want to access on data, you always say this.newToDo. Okay, so we'll look at our console. Make dinner, add to do, and then it logs that value. Awesome. Okay, so now that I have the value, I want to put it somewhere. And if you think about what is the data that could represent a to-do list, think about it, an array, right? We have an array that will have all of our to-dos inside of it. So let's put that on our data. So on our data, I'm going to create to-dos as an array. And essentially, when we want to add a to-do, I'll just push the new to-do into the array. So I'll say to-do this.todos.push this.new to-do. Cool. And so let's watch our dev tools. Select a component instance. What's happening? Why can't I see it? Hard refresh. There it is. And so, whoa now. Okay. So, make dinner is our first to-do item. And you'll notice under the hood, to-dos is an empty array. But when I click add to-do, or not, what happened? Nothing happened. This is weird. Let's make sure this function is running. What? Hello. What? Okay. So this.todos.push new this.new to do. And if we look in the DevTools, I'm very curious why the DevTools weren't updating. Yeah, so now for whatever reason they got updated. Another thing, and if I click add, they're not updating in real time, but it's actually happening. So every time I add a new thing and click add, under the hood it's pushing it into that array. Cool. So now what I want is right below the to-do list, we want to show all of those values that are inside of the array. And for that, there's the handy dandy v4. So right now I'll just do like an h3. And what we're going to say is v4 to do in to-dos. And what this means is for every value inside of this array, and the value right here, to-dos, must be something that's on your data. So we're saying for every value in that array, create this h3 and then give us access to this thing called to-do, and that will be each value in the array. So inside the h3, if I just do to-do, now every value inside that array, we're going to see an h3 below the form. So with the wave of a magic wand, make dinner, go, it shows up. And if I do feed the dog, go, it shows up. And if I say learn Vue.js, it shows up, which is pretty freaking cool. It's like barely any work, right? Awesome. So I want to use a list from Bootstrap. So let's go take a look at what those look like. List group. Yeah, so basically I want to do this. So instead of this h3, we're going to have an unordered list. And the thing that we want to repeat is this list item here. And so essentially we can get rid of all of these because we only need one. Get rid of that h3. And now, right here, we can just do to do. So I should get a nice little list inside of there. So make dinner, add to do. Feed the dog, add to do. Go fishing, add to do. And that looks pretty nice. Also built into Bootstrap are like positioning classes. So I want to push down this list like just a little bit. So I'm going to give it a little bit of margin. Let's see, margin and padding. Cool, yeah, so you can do MR, so margin right 3 is what that means. And essentially I want margin top something. So in here I'm going to do MT, let's try MT3. And that should, yeah, so that pushes it down. So there's a little bit of breathing room between the button and the list. Very cool. Let's look at our checklist. So we created the form, we add the to-do when the form was submitted, and then we showed the to-dos in the list on the page. So now what we want to do is when we click a to-do, mark it as done. And so for this, it's going to get a little more trickier. So the idea is I want to be able to, actually we might create a button inside of here. So let's say we have like the text of the to-do, and then we have a button that they can click that says done. And so do things, add. They can click this done button, and when they click that, we should see like a line through it or something like that. And let's put the button before the word. Yeah. Do other things. Learn to code. And so when I click done, I want to put a line through that. The other thing I'm noticing is when we click add, the form has the old value inside of it. So really easy code to write to clear out this form. After we push the to-do, let's just set this.new to-do to an empty string, and that will automatically clear out the form. So now if I say make dinner and then add it, the form gets cleared out. So we can start typing again. But when I click this done button, I want to mark this to do as done. Now to do that, the thing I'm pushing into the array needs to be a little bit more complex. So instead of just pushing in a string, what I want to push in is something like an object that has a like a title, which would be this.new to do, and then also a value like done, which is initialized to false. So now I could write some code that essentially sets this value to true or false for each of my to-dos. I essentially need a place to store that for every single one of the to-dos. So now that I'm pushing in this object instead of just a simple string, when we add a new to-do, we see that whole object. Now, instead of showing the whole object, I only want to show the title. So now inside of my v4, I can do to-do.title, and that will just show the title. Cool. And so now when I click this done button, I want to call a method that marks the to-do as done. So we'll add a click handler to this button and say, we'll say mark done. And then we'll pass in the to-do. So essentially, because this is being repeated, every call to mark done will be passing in a different to-do. And so now on our methods, let's add mark done. We get in the to-do. And for now, let's just log the to-do. And so if I say make dinner and then click done, we are logging. And this is one thing to note about Vue.js. If you log something that exists inside of your data, it's going to look weird like this. It's called an observer because under the hood, that's how Vue is watching for all these different changes. So whenever we click this, we'll get the latest value. But the idea is it's actually dynamic. That's how it's able to watch for changes. But you'll notice I logged it. Done is false. And we can see the title there. So all I have to do inside this app is mark done to true. Daniel asked if I'm going to be doing a full stack Vue app. Absolutely. One thing I'm thinking about is maybe taking this app, and right now we're just adding them to the page. Like if I refresh this, all of my to-dos go away. But essentially take this app and then hook it up to Express, so we're actually storing these to-dos in a database, and then when the page loads, we get them from an API call. So yeah, I'll do that in a future live stream for sure. Okay, so in mark done, we essentially want to say to-do.done equals true, and that will mark it as done. And then let's do this. So we're going to add a conditional style to the title. So let's add a span and put the title inside of that. Mainly because I want to add a custom, I want to bind a class to this element. So essentially what I want to say, I'll just say :class, and this is an object of CSS classes. And so here I'm going to say, let's just call it done. And it should be, we should add the done class to this to-do if to-do.done is true. We can look like that. So this might look a little bit wonky, but let's see what happens. So now if I add a to-do called make dinner and then click add, let's watch the DOM. So right now we have a span with no classes on it. But when I click done, because done is marked as true, it automatically adds the done class. And just to kind of be clear so it doesn't confuse, let's call it like is done. And so now when to-do.done is true, the is done class gets applied to that element. So to make that work, let's actually create a class called is done. So is done is just going to have a text decoration of line through. Boom! So just like that. So now we can walk the dog and learn Vue.js and learn JavaScript. But now when I click done, boom, it marks it with a little line through it. Let's also do this though. So when it's done, we don't want to see that done button anymore because we've already marked it as done. So the button, I'm going to add another directive called vif. So before I do that, I'm just going to make this a little bit easier to read. When you're working in a framework like Vue.js, often your lines can get really, really long because your HTML starts to get a lot of attributes in it. So you can format it this way. It'll work exactly the same. It's just a little bit easier to read. And then I'm going to conditionally render this button. So I only want to render this button if to-do.done. So if it's not done. And vif is a built-in directive, and basically it says if this evaluates to true, then I won't show this element. And so now we'll say learn Vue.js. And when I mark it as done, the button disappears because now it is done. And other things, walk the dog, eat breakfast, go grocery shopping. And when you click done, nicely barks a little line through it. Very cool. Let's look at our to-do list. So we marked it as done. Let's also add a delete button. So you can mark it as done, but then I also want a button that just totally removes the to-do from the list. And we'll just say delete here. Let's do button danger so it shows up as red. So learn Vue.js. And we do see that delete button. I can mark it as done, but now when I click delete, I want to remove it from the array so it doesn't show up anymore. So let's make that work. So when the delete button is clicked, we will delete, well, let's call it remove to do. And then I'll make this look similar. So now I need a function on my methods called remove that takes in the to do. And now essentially we want to remove it from this array. One thing about the v4 is it also accepts an index, I believe. I believe we can do to do comma I, and I will be the index in the array. So let's see if I pass in I, and then here let's call this index instead, and let's just log the index. I think that'll work. I'm doing that from memory. Learn Vue.js. If it doesn't work, we'll look it up. Cool. And now when I click delete, the index is 0. So essentially, we want to use that index to remove it from the array. And built into JavaScript arrays, there is this method called Splice. So you can do array.splice and then specify the index that you want to remove, and then how many things at that index you want to remove. And in this case, I just want to remove 1. And because Vue.js is watching that array for changes, the moment I splice that to-do out of the array, it gets removed from the array and removed from the view. So let's add a few things. Learn Vue.js, learn Node, learn JavaScript, eat dinner. So we can mark things as done, cool. But if I click delete, boom, it gets removed from the list. And if we look at the actual data under the hood, let's see this happen. I wonder if this will update. It does. Then I can delete that, and then our array is empty. Very, very cool. Delete. Awesome. This is a whole lot of fun. Before I start saving this stuff to local storage, let's kind of review what's happening here. And let's take a quick break. Take a stretch. Look away from the screen. Drink some water. Okay. So, from the top, we have this form. The form has an input where the user can type. We are binding that input to new to-do, which is on our data. As the user types, new to-do gets updated under the hood. When we submit the form, so when we click this button, we're going to call the add to-do function. Add to-do will take this .newToDo, which is what the user typed into the form, and create an object with that value inside of it, and then also done as false. So initially, a to-do is not done. And it takes this object and pushes it into the array. And then inside of our view, we essentially say, for every to-do inside of that array, we want this list item that will have a done button, a delete button, and show the text itself. Then on each individual list item, we have a done button, which when clicked, calls the mark done function and passes in the to-do, the current to-do that we're clicking done on. And so mark done simply just says to-do.done equals true. And now when we do that, we're actually binding a class conditionally. So we're saying if to-do.done is true, apply the isDone class. And in our CSS, the isDone class just sets text decoration to line through. And then we also have this VIF that says if the to-do is done, so if the to-do is not done, we want to show the done button. But if it is done, hide the done button, because you're not going to mark something done twice. It's already done. And then lastly, we have our remove button. And inside of a v4, you can also access the current index. And so this remove function, you pass in the index, and remove will just splice that index out of the array. And the moment we remove it from the array, it gets removed from the view. So that is our to-do app in a nutshell. Learn JavaScript. Learn routing. We'll probably talk about that in the next example. Eat dinner. Can you tell I haven't eaten dinner yet? We can mark done. We can delete. Mark done. Delete. All day long. Very cool. So now I want to save this stuff to local storage. So we're going to watch the to-dos for changes and save it. So built into the browser is this thing called local storage. You saw I had a bunch of data in there. That was from a previous app that I was working on. But the idea is you can store data in here and it persists. So even if a user closes their browser, the next time they come to your website, you'll have access to the data inside of local storage. So just to see how that works, if I say local storage.name equals CJ, now if we look in local storage, the key is name and the value is CJ. And so we can essentially put data in there. But one thing to note is it only stores strings. So if I said local storage numbers equals, let me zoom in a little bit, 1, 2, 3. If we look in local storage, it's in there, but if we get that value back, so if I just say local storage.numbers, it turned it into a string. So essentially, when we store the to-dos, we're going to have to turn that array into a string, and then when we get that back out, we'll have to parse it back into an array. So the way that works is using json.stringify and json.parse. So if I do local storage.numbers equals json.stringify, it essentially, I gotta do that again. It essentially turns that array into a string. So I'll say json.stringify that. And so now it has the actual syntax of an array. But still, if I access local storage.numbers, it's still a string, but if I want to turn that into an array, I can do json.parse and actually get back an array that I can use. So this is what I'm going to do to essentially take the to-dos and put them in local storage. Okay, so on your component, you have access to this thing called watch. Watch is an object, and inside of it, you can add properties that are, we can add methods that are any name of a property that you want to watch. So in my case, I want to watch whenever to-dos change. So I'll create a function called to-dos. And essentially, every time we push into the array or we remove from the array, this function will get called. So I'll just log to-dos changed. And so now, if I say, if I add something, learn Vue.js, to-dos changed. If I say things happened, to-dos changed. So that's awesome. So every time we push into the array, we'll see to-dos changed. And if we delete from the array, we'll also see the fact that things are changing. One thing to note, though, is that it's not watching each object inside of that array. So if I click done, that function doesn't get called because that's an object inside of the array. If we want to actually watch inside of the array, we have to do a deep watch. And I'll look up the syntax for that. Option deep. Deep? This. Okay, so essentially, instead of just a function, it will be an object that has a handler property that is the function, and then deep equals true. So instead of this, we're going to have an object that has a handler that is that, and then deep is true. So now, when the to-dos inside, even like the property like done changes, this will also get called. And so now if I add something like learn Vue.js and then click done, to-dos change still gets called even though the array isn't changing, something inside of it is changing. Okay, so now when it changes, we essentially want to store this stuff in local storage. So when it changes, I'm just going to say local storage dot to-dos equals json.stringify this dot to-dos. Cool. So every time they change, just overwrite the value with the array of to-dos. So let's watch our local storage. We'll clear everything out. Refresh. And so now if I say learn Vue.js, we added it, and so it got stored in local storage. Then if I mark it as done, boom, it updates. If I add something else, eat dinner, you'll notice it got bigger, but essentially that also exists inside of there. And if I mark this as done, it got updated again, and that is set as done. Awesome. So now every time I do something, and even when I delete, it gets updated. It's stored in local storage. So now what I want to happen is when the page loads, get the value out of local storage so we can actually see our to-do. So if I refresh the page, the data goes away over here, but it's still stored inside of local storage. So here's what I will do. Right here on my data, actually I'll do it inside of the mounted method. So one thing you can do inside of a component is say when it's mounted, or essentially when it's added to the page, run this function. So when our to-do app is mounted, this function will run. And essentially we want to say if local storage dot to-dos is a thing. So if there are some values in there, we're going to overwrite to-dos. So I'll say this dot to-dos equals json.parse local storage dot to-dos. And now when the page loads, we automatically get the data from local storage. So I can add all kinds of things like make dinner, go for a walk, learn JavaScript. And now if I close this tab, or even if I close the browser, I can go back to that page, and when it loads, when it loads, it automatically gets it out of local storage. So that persists. It's important to note that that only persists inside of this one browser. So if a user goes to your app on their phone, the data is not going to be there. But it's pretty cool for just persisting what we have there. And even if we like mark things done and refresh, they'll show up that way too. Pretty freaking awesome. So we have watched the to-dos for changes and saved them to local storage. And we have loaded the to-dos from local storage on page load. Very cool. Any thoughts, comments, questions about this? Anybody watching at home? Or at work, or on a bus, wherever you're watching. I don't know where you're watching. But that's pretty much it for the to-do app. I'll go ahead and push the code up and then start working on another app. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Let's add everything. Commit it. Sparkles, add to-do app. Boom. Push it up. And as I mentioned, the code for this is linked in the description, and I just pushed up the app I just built, so you can take a look at that code too. Very cool. So I've been streaming for about an hour. I think I'll probably only have time to do this last one, the Reddit client. Probably stream for another 30 minutes or so. Anything in the chat? Okay, cool. And of course you can ask anything, or I could go back to that app later if you want me to as well. All right, so up until now, we have been generating the app with Webpack Simple. And for the most part, it is very simple. There's just a source directory, and that's where all of our Vue code goes. For this next app, I'm going to use the full Webpack template. And that has a lot more stuff built in. So it includes a client-side router. It'll set up linting for you by default. It'll set up unit testing and end-to-end testing, and probably ask you some other things as well. But it's a bit more involved than the simple app. So I'll get into that. Yeah, so in the chat, someone mentioned local storage.getItem and setItem. It is exactly the same. So you saw me do like local storage dot name equals CJ, exactly the same as local storage dot get item. Well, sorry, and then if I did local, oh yeah, if I just did local storage dot name, that is the same thing as local storage dot get item name. It's just a shorthand property, for, shorthand version of that. But they both work the same way. Jason made it. Welcome, Jason. Awesome. Okay, so we are on to generating a slightly more complex app. So instead, we're going to use the Webpack template, and this is going to be our Reddit clone. Go. Reddit clone. A Reddit clone. And you'll notice this is going to ask me a lot more questions. So first, do I want runtime only or runtime and compiler? I always choose runtime and compiler because when you actually deploy your app, it will be runtime only. It does all the optimization it needs to be as small as possible. Use Vue router, yes please. Use ESLint, I will. I'm going to use the Airbnb preset. Won't do any unit tests or end-to-end tests. That's for another video. Use npm and go. While that's churning, I'm going to show you Reddit. If you're not familiar, you're probably familiar with Reddit. Super popular site. And the cool thing about Reddit is if in the URL you do .json, this will give you back that subreddit as a JSON object that you can actually request inside of your app and use the data from it. Does anyone have an idea or a request for a subreddit that I should get data from? My initial thought is r/aw. It's pictures of cute animals. So there's, oh, it's a little kitty. Oh, wow. Oh my goodness, a little corgi. Rare puppers. Thanks, Subin. Subin says, CJ's the man. Rare puppers. That's probably like r/aw. That is not a pupper, but his whiskers are frozen. Puppies are great. Okay, let's use rare puppers. Actually, we could also probably make it so the user can choose the subreddit, but we'll use this one as an example. So if in the URL I do .json, that will give me that subreddit as a JSON object, and I have access to all of the posts. So the property children here is an array of all the posts on that page, and then inside of that array, each object is a post. So it has data, and then it has like a title. It also has all the images. Where's title? Title. It's somewhere. We will definitely find it whenever we. Oh, here it is. Friends, this water girl needs worms. Please help. So all of the information from that page is accessible inside of this object. So that's where we're going to be getting our data from. Okay, so when you use the Webpack template, it automatically does npm install for you. So all we have to do is cd into the Reddit clone and then do npm run dev. That will start up, again, the Webpack dev server. Takes a little bit longer because it is a little bit more complex. But now we can go to localhost 8080. You see the same basic Vue.js app, but let's take a look at the folder structure. So we generated the app, but let's talk about the folder structure. So if I look in here, there is a lot of stuff. Now, if you're a Vue.js beginner, you can essentially ignore everything except for the source folder. You can leave everything else as it is. Your app will work. Once you start customizing Webpack loaders, or you need to modify your ESLint file, that's when you can start touching the other files. But for the most part, you can kind of ignore everything and just work inside of source. If we look at index.js, It's super simple. It just has a div with ID app. That is where our Vue.js app is going to get loaded. And just like before, we can add bootswatch in this file. But all of our code is in source. If we look at main.js, this one's a little more interesting. If we look back, so let's look at the simple example like with Todo of its main.js. You'll notice the render function takes in the component. But in this, we don't have a render function. We can just specify the app template. And that's because of that runtime plus compiler thing that I chose. That allows me to specify an actual template rather than a render function. I know for some of you that might be total another language. That's okay. You don't even have to worry about any of it. It'll just work. And just like before, we can look at app.vue, but you'll notice it's a lot simpler this time. So one thing I'm going to be using in this one is routing. So the idea of client-side routing is all of your app code still exists on one page. So you still technically, when the user goes to your website, they're only going to one page. But JavaScript will dynamically add pages. So it'll change the main contents of the page using under the hood DOM manipulation to be whichever page you tell it to be. And that's what this router view does. So basically, if we look in router, we've defined some routes. We say when the URL is / load the hello world component into router view. And if we look at components, this is now a separate component. This is where Vue.js gets really powerful because you can create tiny components and components inside of components. But this is exactly the same as the code that we had in the app.vue when we generated the simple app, but now it's in a separate file. And essentially, by having this router view right there, whatever the URL is, it'll load that component right there. So if we already started it up. If we look in the browser, notice how the URL is /, so it loads the hello world component right there. Cool. Let's clean this up a bit. So first thing we're going to do, if we look at our README, is add bootswatch here. Any suggestions as to which one I should use? There is a delay. First one to say it, unless it's something I don't like. I think maybe I'm curious how delayed the chat is. No idea. Let's do... I'm lost in the options. There are too many options. I like the rounded buttons. Let's actually look at rare puppers. Daniel suggests solar. Which one is that? Yeah, why not? This actually looks like I think it's Monokai, which is like a syntax highlighting theme, typically commonly used in Sublime Text. Yeah, let's go with solar. That looks pretty cool. I like it. So we can click here. We can grab that CSS. And just like before, we can go to index.html and just add a link tag here. So we'll add that. And then let's clean things up. So if we look in the source folder and we look at app.vue, I'm going to get rid of all these styles. So get rid of that. I'll get rid of the Vue.js logo. And then in our hello world component, I'll get rid of everything. Go away. We'll get rid of all of these styles. Cool thing about this is, so I mentioned components. We can create lots of different components. If you put the word scoped on your styles, any styles defined in here will only apply to this component, so they won't leak out to the rest of your app, which is pretty cool. And then we'll have nothing on our data. And for now, I'll just throw an h1 that says posts. And in our app.view, let's add an h1 that says Reddit clone. See what we get. Hard refresh? Yeah, there we go. So it's using the Bootswatch theme now. Let's center the title. So, on the div, I'll give it a class of container. Actually, let's try to kind of emulate Reddit as much as we can. I won't spend too much time, but let's see what we can do. So, I think I will add like a nav bar at the top that says like r/rare puppers. Let's do it. So in Bootstrap, if we go to components and nav bar, I want a super simple nav bar, one like this. Do that one. And I'll add this right there. And here I'll say r/rare puppers. Cool. So that shows up. We could add the image. I'm curious what this it's got little puppers moving across. How are they doing that? Oh well, I'm not gonna worry about it. I think it's good enough for now. We had a nice little header bar. And then now I want to show all of the posts inside of our component. And so instead of keeping this called hello world, let's rename it. Let's call this posts.view, and we'll give it the name posts. And I'm getting a little error message, which is sweet. That's coming from Webpack DevTools, because our router is looking for a thing called hello world. Instead, I renamed it to posts. And so now, when the app loads, when the URL is / load the posts component. Same functionality, we just gave it a different name. Okay, so let's make the request to get this data inside of the posts component. Now, typically, you want to do this inside of mounted. So like when this component is mounted, we will make the request. But I also want to be able to potentially like refresh the posts and make the request again at some other time. So I'm also going to create something on my methods. So I'm going to create a method called load. And this is where I'll actually fetch the posts. But on mounted is where I will just say this.load. So when the component is mounted, call the load function. The load function will make the requests for all of the data. Break timer, take a quick stretch. And so inside of here, I'll make the request. So I'm just going to use fetch. It's built into the browser. I will create a URL variable. So let's say URL is that. And then we'll make the request. And then we get back a response. And we'll turn that response into JSON. And then we get back, let's call it result. And then we will just log the result. Let's see what happens. So page loads, DevTools open, and we logged some data. But you'll also note that I have all of these linter warnings. And so I use the Airbnb rules by default. And they have rules like objects should have trailing commas. So in posts line 20, I need a trailing comma. Wait, that's not the right line number. I do need a trailing comma there and a trailing comma there. And I think that's mainly it. If I look at my app.view, that looks okay. If I do a hard refresh, it's complaining, give me a warning for my console log. It's also saying expected parentheses around arrow function, so result needs to have parentheses around it. I think it's, if it has a body, put parentheses. If it's a one-liner, no parentheses. Just part of the rules. And now it's only complaining about the console log. Cool. When I am using the Airbnb rules, I try to get rid of those warnings as often as possible so they don't like build up. They technically are just warnings, but it is good to maintain a good coding style. Okay, so we got the data. If we look in there, it has a data property, and that has a children property, which is all of the posts. So if we think about, again, what is the data that represents my app, in this case, it's going to be some posts. So I'll make that an array. And now when we get back the data, we want to set that array to be what we got back. And so for our case, we want result.data.children. So result.data.children are the actual posts. And so if I refresh the page, now we're just logging the array. So essentially, I want to set this.posts to be result.data.children. Cool. So I'll do a refresh. If we look at the Vue dev tools, you'll notice I have app, but inside of app is the post component, and inside of that, the post property is set to an array of objects. Very cool. So let's show each of those on the page. I'm going to go to the Bootstrap docs. I think they have something. Let's look at list groups. Maybe it'll be like a list group with an image or something like that. If anybody has any suggestions, let me know. Custom content. This could work because we could do like the title of the post and then have number of comments, when it was submitted, the user that submitted it. JavaScript behavior. Interesting. Fade effect. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll do something like this, and then we can use the Bootstrap grid system to make it probably like 2 columns, or probably 3 columns. So the first column is upvotes, second column is image, and then third column is all of the information about it. I think I'll do that. Let's look at maybe cards. Is there anything for media? If anybody has suggestions of something else I should use, feel free to throw it out there. Media list. Hey, that's exactly what I want, right? Because we could throw the thumbnail right there, all of the information inside of there. Yeah, I like it. I guess the only thing is, if I do want to put the upvotes on the left-hand side, might not support that. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to use this. Inside of my view, it's just going to go right here. For now, I only want... let's just throw 1 in there to see what it looks like. I'm getting an error. What's the error? Module not found. Can't resolve. ... Could be because all of this stuff is in there. Let's do that. I think that's what it was. Like it attempts to load the actual Webpack will see that URL of the image and attempt to load it and throws an error. I do have a linter error. I'm missing a trailing comma right there. Let's grab the actual image here just so we can see what it looks like. Whoa. That probably should still work. Yeah. And then I just want to add some padding up on top. So we can use that handy dandy margin top -3. Boom. Very cool. Yeah, so it's looking good. Let's actually repeat this thing. So let me get rid of that placeholder image. That. Okay. So if you remember back to our to-do app, the thing we want to repeat is the in this case, the list item, because we want to show this for every single thing inside of posts. So that's where I'm going to put my v4. So v-4 equals post in posts. And if I do that, now we get a bunch of them. Very cool. Now let's start setting their properties. So let's find the thumbnail. So if we look in our data, we'll look in the Vue Dev Tools, we'll look at posts, and let's just look at like this first object. Can I expand this? Cool. So it's going to be post.data. I want something like thumbnail. Yeah, .thumbnail. So the source of this will be post.data.thumbnail. And in Vue.js, if you want the value of an attribute to be interpreted as actual code, you bind it. So if you put that colon there, that lets Vue know that it should actually reach into that object and grab that property. And just like that, we got some thumbnails. Badass. Wow. Let's add a little bit of padding around, well, a little bit of margin so they're not like butting up against each other. So on the LI, if I do, I wonder if it's margin all. It's not. What if it's just margin? Yeah. Let's do margin -3. Cool. And so now each post got a little bit of breathing room. Okay, so now we want to show the title of the post right there. So that's just going to be post.data.title. Let's throw that right there. And there we go. Very cool. And now instead of like all this text, let's make it look like this. So we'll show number of comments, we'll show number of upvotes, and maybe we'll add like a little link that will open the post in a new tab. Let's look at our data though. So do we have access to comments? So we have ups, so that's number of upvotes. We have the permalink. I guess I definitely want that because I want to link back over to Reddit so we can see the comments. Filter inspective data. Can I find comment? It's got to be in here somewhere. Let's look at this. Num comments. Cool. So I believe Bootstrap has like badges. Yeah, so we can add a badge. I think, do they have... Yeah, we could do like a pill badge with the number of comments in it. Why not? And let's do secondary, so it shows up kind of gray. Well, actually, we don't know what it will be. And so let's just add a paragraph here. And first thing will be the comments. So I'm going to do post.data.num comments, I think it was called. Yeah. And so now that won't work because we need to put it inside of handlebars. Boom. So 9. And let's just put the word comments after that. 9 comments. 206 comments. Very cool. Let's see what happens if I try to add a div right here that puts the upvotes. So let's just do like an h3 with post.data. It's like ups or something. Yeah. Wow, that one has a ton. So technically that works. I don't like the spacing though. Let's just put it on. We'll put it on the right. So we've got. Let's put number of upvotes there. So we'll say that. And let's just do an emoji for now. Up. Actually, I think Bootstrap has icons built in. That's cool. But yeah, let's see if Bootstrap. We can use their icons. Oh, apparently Bootstrap 4 does not have built-in icons. We could use like Font Awesome. I think I'm okay with the little emoji. That's pretty cool, huh? Let's give that. different class though. I wonder if I do this like class equals danger, will it show up red? No. Oh well. Let's create our own class ups, and then down in our styles we'll create the ups class and give it a color of red. Wow, that does not at all match our color palette. Utilities, colors. Oh, we can do text dash danger, and then it'll be the, yeah, I won't do this because then it will be like the built-in red color, so it'll actually fit the theme. Cool. All right, so we show comments. Let's also show who it was posted by. So we have our created UTC. Because we want to show the date it was submitted. So created. Actually, I think created will be the time zone of the thing requesting it. So yeah, we could do that. So let's say right here, we'll just have paragraph that says created, and then we'll do post.data.created, and then that shows that. But let's pull in a date parsing library. So Daniel asked, do I normally use a CSS framework or roll my own? I normally just use a CSS framework. And that's mainly because like CSS isn't my strongest area. I can write CSS and debug things. I've never built my own style guide or anything like that. One thing I have done is modified an existing CSS framework. So like Bootstrap, you can actually download the source, which is in Sass, I believe. It used to be less. I think it's Sass now. And then you can override like the primary color, the secondary color, that kind of thing. But typically I use CSS frameworks either as is or slightly modified. So for dates, I'm going to use a library called date functions. This is a modern JavaScript date library. The thing I like about it is instead of being like a global object, everything is a function. So a function that I'm going to want is first parse, because we'll pass in the date number that we're getting right there. And yeah, so Daniel mentioned Bulma is pretty cool. So there's lots of CSS frameworks out there. There's like Bulma, modern CSS framework based on Flexbox. It looks pretty sweet. We can look at their, where are we at? Components. And yeah, so Bulma's cool. There's also like materialized CSS and ink CSS and semantic UI. There's a ton of them. It is break time though, and I have been streaming for an hour and a half. So once I get all the date parsed and like all the information added in a link, we'll call it quits there. But yeah, this has been fun. We're building Vue.js apps. Super cool. So let's install date functions. So inside of my Vue.js app, so I want to make sure I'm in that folder. I can do npm install date functions. And then right inside of that component, I'm going to bring in parse. So right up at the top, I can import other components, but I'm just going to import parse. And then now I'm going to add a method called format date. We'll put this below load. Format date. This will take in the date. First thing we'll do is do parse and then pass in the date. And for now, let's just do that. So right here, I can do format date and then pass in date created. And that should give us like a big long date. Yeah, so now it says the actual date. But then we can use, I don't know if it's ago, from now, humanize. Essentially, I want it to show up as like 13 hours ago, 14 hours ago, that kind of thing. Forget what it's called though. Let's go there. Since ago? Let's just look. Range helpers, minute helpers, hour helpers, day helpers, weekday helpers, week helpers, month helpers, year helpers. It's in here somewhere. I've used it before. Let's search for it. Date, functions, time ago. Or I think it's like time from now or like humanize or something like that. Oh, is it not built in? This person implemented it from scratch. Distance in words is what it's called. I don't like that. Oh, distance between the given dates. Yeah, so technically we could do the distance between now and when it was created. So yeah, let's use that. We can also import this here. Notice the docs are telling us to bring each function in. We can also use destructuring. So if we just say import parse and then distance in words from date functions, it'll bring both of those in. And so date to compare and then date. So if I do distance in words with that and a new date, so compare when it was created with right now, what do we get? 48 years. Okay, I think what's happening is this thing that I'm passing in is not in Unix time. I wonder if it has any other like date property. Actually, can I just use the built-in date? New date with that value. 1970, no. What if I multiply this times 1,000? That looks like it's what I want. How did I know that? Just a guess. John Ryan, yes. So this is basically I'm getting data from the Reddit API and then just adding it to the page to kind of make it look like Reddit itself. So the date we got was, I believe, a Unix timestamp, and in order for us to parse that, we need to multiply it by 1,000, which is what the JavaScript date uses to parse it. I only know that because I've like done it before. Cool. So created about 6 hours. That does not match up though. Submitted 12 hours ago, 13 hours ago. Very curious. What if I used created UTC? Maybe that's what I want. So up here we'll pass in created UTC. Okay, that matches. And then we'll just add the ago on the end there. Created about 14 hours ago. That's pretty sweet. And then let's add the user's name. Is there a user property? User reports. Okay, so what is this user's name? XDKYX. Author. So created ago by post.data.author. Very cool. What else do we need? So got comments. Let's make the link actually open up the Reddit comments. So if we look in here, the permalink will actually open up. Well, actually, no, we can use URL, because if I click that URL, oh, that's of the actual image. That's cool. But permalink is to the actual page of this post. So let's make it so that on the title here, this is an anchor tag with an href to the permalink. So let's do href equals post.data.permalink, and we'll bind that. But you'll notice it's not the full URL. So now if I hover over these, it's trying to link to them against the current URL. I don't want that. Let's create a little function that puts the like www.reddit.com in front of this. So let's say create link with a value. Create link. Well, we'll say create URL. And so on our methods, we will have create URL that takes in the path. And then we want to return, we can do a template string with https://www.reddit.com/ well, I don't think we need the slash, path. Yeah, I call it lint. I think I changed it. Yeah. And then let's do target equals blank. So this will actually open the link on a new page. And so yeah, so now when I hover over, if you notice in the bottom left, it has the full URL, and if I click it, it takes us to Reddit. Pretty sweet. We've got all the posts in here. It's pretty awesome. Let's see. Anything else I need to add? I should add from Reddit data. I think one thing that would be cool is, so I have, if you're an avid Redditor, you might be familiar with the Reddit Enhancement suite. And so this is an extension for your browser that adds this little button there. I don't think this is doing it by default. I don't know, you tell me. When you look at Reddit, actually, I'll open it in Safari. So if I go to Reddit, do I have a cool little button like that? Loading. It's a play button. And that does it. Okay, I guess Reddit added it themselves. It's also part of the Reddit Enhancement suite. But last thing I'll do, we'll add a nice little button right there that shows the image in line, and then we can hide it too. So let's do that. So like right below, well, where do we want to put it? Let's put it right here. Right now, I'll just do a button. Show image. Cool. Actually, I'll put it underneath because I think the image will appear right below it. And basically, right here, let's create a nice little div, and inside of that, I'm gonna have an image tag that will be the image URL. So Emmy says they missed the comments part. There was a property on the data that was the number of comments. I didn't have to do anything for that. And then our link will actually take us to the comments, but the permalink is just in the data itself. So the permalink links to the comments page where you can read all of the Reddit comments. And here is where we're going to use .url. And I'll just do this by default, but on Reddit, not every post has to have an image. Rare Puppers is usually every post is an image, so this should work. But if I do a post.data. What was it? URL, and then I bind that. That should show the image right there. But now they're all showing by default. And actually, this is curious though, because these aren't showing, and I want to know why. So if we look at even the second. So the second result from Rare Puppers, what was I using? The URL is not valid. So if we look at our children, we want the second child, and then its URL is, we'll collapse preview. Its URL, GIF-V. I don't know how to embed a GIF-V. HTML embed GIF-V. Is it a video? Well, that's not helpful. How to embed GIFs on your website. That's not what I want to do. You know what? If I go directly to this URL, does it load? Oh, it does. I'm going to do an iframe. Let's see. Okay. Iframe, and then like a closing iframe. Let's see what happens. Borked. Does iframe use src? Yeah, so the source is that, and it does not load at all. Lame. Ugh. Okay. For now, only the things that are images will show up as images. Actually, let's just look at the source of the page on Reddit. So like, when I'm looking at this and I click this, what does it do? It looks like it adds a video tag. Video, and then source is MP4. Oh, well, I guess that's specific to Imager. This is tricky. Okay, for now, I'm only going to show the images that are actually images. I have been streaming for a while. So, okay, so by default, we see all of the images, but I want to hide those initially. So let's do this. So this is going to be a v-if, and I'll say post.showImage. And initially, that doesn't exist, but I need to create it. So essentially what we're going to do is when we get back the data, before setting it on this, we'll add that property. So I'll say this.data.children.map. Well, I can do a for each because I'm not going to be returning any data. We'll say child, and then child.showImage is false. So initially, that gets set to false. Probably the last break timer we're going to see before I finish up this app. Thanks to everyone that has been commenting and has joined in. This has been super fun. And I've been, for the most part, building pretty basic Vue.js apps. Like, I don't have multiple components or really multiple routes. Future videos, though, definitely. And also, hooking up Vue.js to your own backend, I'll do in future videos. So the idea of this is initially I want to set showImage, create a property called showImage on every single value in the array. And it's important that I create this property here versus creating it after I set it on data. Because in Vue.js, if you dynamically add a property to something on data, you have to use view.set. But if I add the property before setting it on data, I don't have to do that. If you ever run into an error with Vue.js where you're adding a property and it's not watching for changes, that's the reason why. But because I'm doing this, I don't have to worry about that. You are welcome, Emmy, for the video. Okay, last thing. So when I click the show image button, I want to toggle this show image. So let's say when I click this equals show image, and I'll pass in the post. Well, actually, I could just do it right in line. So let's say post.showImage equals not post.showImage. So it should toggle it. And so just like that, showImage shows it and hides it. That doesn't show up. But let's change the text inside of here. So basically, if we want to dynamically show, say show. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to use handlebars and we're going to use a ternary. So I'm going to say if post.showImage, then this should say hide. Else it should say show. So if this is true, the button should be updated to hide, but if it's false, it should say show. So if I click it, then it updates to hide, and then I click it, it goes back to show. I guess one last thing is I'll hide this button if it isn't actually an image that will work. So let's do this. Let's hide this button. So let me format this a little bit so it's easier to read all the stuff. And I only want to show this button, so I'll say vif is image, and then I'll pass in the post. And then I'll create some custom logic that checks to see if this post is actually an image. So on my methods, I'll add is image that takes in the post. And we want to say if, or really we want like post.data.url ends with, and I'm actually going to look up ends with because it might take a regular expression and that will make it really easy with me. So ends with is built into JavaScript, built into strings. And the characters to be searched for at the end of the string. Can it be a regular expression? I don't think so. But we could use a regular expression that says ends with. It would get tricky though. Let's try it. So just to play around. So let's say I have this string image.jpg. And I want to see if that ends with JPG. So throw in my regular expression. And we'll say, I believe, end. And we want it to be .jpg. And we have to escape the dot. That matches. But if I do like .gif-v, does not match. So I basically want to say if it ends with, I think I can use parentheses or no. Yeah, let's use parentheses. So if it ends with .jpg, so we want to look for a period and then JPG. So does that match? No. But does JPG match? Yes. So I want JPG or PNG or JPEG or bitmap. Let's look up all the image types. Image file formats. I said that would be our last break timer. One more, one more break timer, and then I'll be done. I think we should be able to. I think that should be enough, at least for this simple app. So, if the URL ends with JPEG, PNG, JPEG, or BMP, we will show the image. So I'm going to use that. So I'm going to do that and just return it. And so now we should only see that button on things that are images. So like this GIF-V thing doesn't show the button, but these do. Yay! We did it! All right, let's do just a quick review. This app was probably might have been like more conceptually simple than the other apps, but one thing I showed is like creating a pretty complex view and using data from an API and filling in that data. And I guess I said I was going to use routing. I didn't use routing. I think in the checklist I said I was going to add like add to favorites. We didn't get to that. I really don't want this stream to be any longer than it already is. So future stream, I'll definitely do a Vue.js app with multiple pages. Quick review of what this thing is doing. So in our app.vue, we have our navbar up top that says r/rarepuppers. We then have our router view, and if we look at our router code, it says when the URL is / load the post component, and then our post component is just a basic template that has an unordered list and then list items for every post in the posts array. If we look at our component, the data under the hood is just an array of posts, and that gets initialized as empty. So when the page loads, there is no data. But then we have this mounted function. So in Vue.js, there are different lifecycle methods like mounted, unmounted, destroyed, before destroy. And inside of those methods, you can do whatever you want. And in my case, I wanted to load the data when the component was mounted. So we call load. And inside of load, I just make a fetch out to the Reddit API. And I get back the data. And once I get it back, I created this property show image because I wanted to be able to hide and show the image. And so I initialized that to false. So later on, when we click a button, it would set it to true. And then I say this.posts equals children. And because Vue.js is reactive, the moment I update that array to be the data I got back, all of that template will get created for every single post inside of it. Inside of the template, I wanted to format the date. So I pulled in this date functions library that gave us functions for parsing the date and then using distance in words. So that gives us like about 14 hours ago or about 15 hours ago or about 7 hours ago rather than just seeing the actual date. So we're formatting that. And to use a method inside of the template, you simply just call it inside of handlebars. So that looks like created, and then this will get evaluated and returned, ago by, and then we pull in the author as well. And so this one line is a template for that. We're using a fancy little badge pill from Bootstrap to show the number of comments there. And then I also created this create URL method. So we're using that on the anchor tag. So inside of the data, the permalink is just a path. So if we look at it, it's just a path to Reddit. And so I wanted to put the full Reddit URL on there. So inside of this method, it essentially just takes reddit.com and puts it in front of the path. And then lastly, we wanted that image button to only show up if the post itself was actually an image. So I actually used a regular expression to look at the end of the URL to see if it ended with JPEG, PNG, or JPEG, or BMP. And if it ends with any of those, we actually show this button where we can toggle the image to show it in line. Pretty cool. That is our Vue.js app. I will go ahead and commit the code and push it up. Add it, commit it. Sparkles, add Reddit, clone. Go! Push it up. Thanks again to everyone for watching. Thanks again if you're watching later. This has been super fun. This has been Coding Garden with CJ. And last thing, hello, look at me, I'm floating, is this. Awesome. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.